Welcome, everyone. Hello, everyone. No matter where you are in the world, it's a pleasure to see you virtually to our interactive panel, the era of real-time compliance, which we truly are in. And this is going to be a great fireside chat. I'm Robert Milstein on behalf of Thought Leader Global. My colleagues, Fonoa, put this together. It's a pleasure to work with them again, both Rob Woude and Eiko Kovakize, both from Fonoa, previously from Uber, and our expert, Erich Tschopp from Airbnb. We're going to have a great discussion with them, very insightful one. To our online attendees, if you can hear me and see us, give us a thumbs up with your emoji button at the bottom of the screen. I see them coming through, so that's good. We already have our first comment from Andre here, I see. And already a question about why companies are still in need of tax technology. What would still be the challenges? I think we're going to possibly address that in today's discussion.
Hopefully.
To our attendees, you can see in the upper right corner the chat, which is where most of the comments will be. There's also a Q&A tab, if you'd like to put it there. And you can send each other private messages if you click the people button, and then you can also see who's online. To save time, I'm going to limit my opening remarks just to say thank you for being here, taking the time in your schedule to join this important conversation. Again, thank you to the panel. And I'll be here to make sure everything technically works for everyone. And if you miss parts of it, there'll be a video as well. So appreciate everyone's involvement. And having said that, I send the virtual microphone to my colleagues. Actually, I would like to do one quick thing before that.
Go for it.
Please see on your screen a poll that we're going to do right now. How prepared is your business for real-time compliance? It's now published. You should be able to see it. See if I can get it on the screen, though, if possible.
I was about to say, I didn't get it, but it could be perhaps because I'm...
Yeah, what is going on? You might have to check the poll button on the right side of the dashboard, though it should be more user-friendly than that.
The functionality of these platforms is overwhelming.
Yeah, indeed.
From emojis to questions to polls. Everything is possible. You just have to figure out how.
Yes. We got our first few votes, but in the dashboard, upper right corner, there's 3 horizontal bars that says polls. Click on that. You should see it there. We have 4 votes. I would like to get a few more than that, and we can revisit this later.
Yeah. Well, maybe it? Robert, just to add to that, when I click on polls, there's like a drop down as well with view, and if you dare go from discussion to webinar polls, that's where I
webinar. Indeed, webinar polls.
And maybe you first need to do the drop down.
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Thanks, Rob.
It's hidden. It's hidden.
Yeah. Normally, I should also be able to bring it on the screen. I don't know why I can't, but we have at least 15 votes coming in, which is nice.
Now that everyone know where it is, that you'll
20 votes actually now.
There you go.
Unblocked.
Exactly. Unblocked.
Yes. Sorry for the extra step. 24. I think a few more seconds. While we have your attention, because I think in these type of events, it's good to do a poll at the beginning. We're almost at 30. Let's see. I actually have an insight into the results. I don't know if you guys can see which.
I cannot. No,
I can't.
We will share that at the end. But let's just say, just the third option, actually, just starting to look into it, is winning at 62%. Actually, I should say. Nobody's fully prepared yet. No one's willing to admit that they're fully prepared and already in place. But a surprisingly high number so far, 31% is somewhat prepared. So that's interesting. We're at 32. We'll take a few more seconds, and then we'll just put that aside. Okay, 33. Those percentages are holding. I hand it over to you. We can. This will be in the background. And we can.
Yeah, I was about to say we can. When we're done, will you just chip in and tell us what the outcome is, or how does that work?
Yes. Let me know what the outcome is. We might have another poll that.
We'll just do it later on. Well. Okay, awesome. Well, maybe just to kind of like do a bit of a broader intro, Robert, if that's okay with you. For those of the audience that doesn't know us, Eiko, my co-host today, is our head of tech technology at Fonoa. Myself, for those of you that don't know me, I'm the chief tax officer at Fonoa. But most importantly, our expert today is, of course, Erich on the line. Erich, just a very quick intro about you, if you don't mind, from my end. I think you're absolutely one of the most interesting people in tax today. You live in the sunny state, Florida, right?
Miami.
you travel so much that's hardly a fact. You're all over the place, right? From east to west, Asia, Pacific to LATAM and everything in between. And for good reason. You talk to a lot of folks in the industry. As the head of global indirect tax at Airbnb, you are very well respected by peers, by the way, that I talk to, at least, as well as by governments, including tax authorities and major policymakers, which I think is admirable. That's not something that's easy in your position. So we're very fortunate to have you on today again, I have to say. So thank you for taking the time. And for those of the people in our audience today that have not seen our previous conversation, it was, I think, by now a year ago or so, probably, Robert, a little bit more. Same kind of group spoke about marketplaces, in particular the sharing and gig economy. Precisely, I think that's a very interesting one for those of the people in the audience that are considering or in the business of marketplace models. There are quite some good things in there. So maybe that's something that we can share after, Robert. I'm not sure if there's like a link or something like that, but let's for now get straight into today's topic. We're going to talk about the era of real-time compliance, as I like to call it, and of course then also how to build your tax function to be future-proof and ready for that new era. You, Erich, lead Airbnb from a global indirect tax perspective. Can you perhaps just start with giving us and the audience a bit of an idea of what that means, right? So what are like your core responsibilities, team size? What is the impact that tax has on a business that's so on the forefront as Airbnb?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me. I'm always happy to, anyone that wants to talk about indirect taxes, I'm always happy to jump on and chat. So with my role for indirect tax at Airbnb, it's VAT, it's tourist taxes, which is unique to us. Controversy, it's all the product and engineering work, advising the business. It's all the data reporting like Doc 7, US 1099, so on and so forth. And then my favorite is all the tax policy work. And that's why I'm traveling all over the globe, trying to partner with governments and organizations on solutions that are scalable and reasonable instead of running around saying no to everything, just trying to work with the stakeholders. I have a team of 20, and then I have folks in LATAM, EMEA, and APAC to also assist. And then I have 32 engineers and PMs. Wow.
That's quite heavy on the product and tech side, right?
Well, this has been happening for a long time. The shift of a lot of responsibilities to the platforms or the companies.
Yeah.
And it's been, trust me, it's been a journey to get to that product size. It wasn't always like that, but it was, after a while, it was pretty easy to justify the impact and why we needed to make that investment.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned this. I could ask them this. I mean, you mentioned that for you, it's been a journey. For people, some people, they're only starting on that journey. Some of the things that are coming to light today that you've been at the forefront, for example, the pieces on data sharing and payments on behalf, a lot of the things that marketplace and platforms are experiencing, they've been around for some of the platforms today only for a matter of months. Whereas for you, I think if I go back to even the articles coming back to 2016, 2017, around about that time, 2018, this started for years ago for the likes of you. You guys were at the front seat of when this was becoming not even mainstream, but it's let's say mainstream now. What's that like?
Well, I mean, look, Eiko, where did you and I first meet? This would go way back to Working Party 10 at the OECD on data reporting, So again, it was always the goal to be at the forefront, at the table, trying to help drive good solutions that work for governments, that work for platforms, that work for companies. It's funny though, I spent a lot of time I get a lot of from different people on my network. Would you mind talking to such and such from blank company, because they're just getting into, or they're just realizing, when Doc 7 came up, they're realizing like, oh my God, I'm subject to Doc 7, I'm subject to, maybe CSOP or these other regimes. So I'm always happy to, like I said, I'll talk to anyone that's willing to listen to about this stuff. But early on though, this journey, it took a lot of work to get my internal stakeholders to understand where the world was going, why we need to invest in this, and why, it's impactful to the business overall. A lot of these regimes that impact supply, demand, pricing, user experience, all that type of stuff. So it took a while to get people convinced, but in this day and age, our executives truly care about everything in the indirect tax function for sure.
It's so interesting, right? So what you basically did, which I think is quite novel, is changing from a very reactive, let's see where something lands and then fight to become compliant, typically in a chaotic way. And you pivoted more towards like, let's collaborate upfront ahead of time to make sure that we have a say in the matter and that we kind of get ahead of things that are so impactful for our business overall, especially in your business, right? That's super interesting.
I always say you can't complain if you don't vote. So that's why,
exactly.
So even if something ends up going away that, I really, would prefer it didn't, you have to try. You have to try, because all of us bring a unique perspective that, look, I don't know what it's like to work for a government. I've never done it before. But we bring a unique perspective because things like data sharing or real-time reporting, it sounds easy. It's like, well, how tough could that be? You must have all this data. You must just hit send but
exactly.
Nothing is easy at all, even if it seems it.
Yeah. Sometimes, Erich, just as an anecdotal example, back in the day when I was in a similar role, I had an interesting chat with someone at the tech storage that said, well, look, can you not just put all of the data on a USB stick and just hand it over to me? Like, yeah, I think you're probably thinking in a different kind of like landscape than we are actively operating in today. But by the way, now that you do mention like being on the forefront and that we're talking about collaborating with government and how they think, I clearly have to address the elephant in the room for those of you that have been online in the last couple of hours. There was this updated draft on VIDA, right, in the EU last week that came out. Today, we have some news. And for those of you that haven't followed it, I think the news basically is the Estonian government is basically blocking agreement on it a few hours ago, as they did not like the deemed supplier rules much. I'm not sure if you had any time today, by the way, to look at it, or maybe perhaps last week to the revised draft, and if you have anything that you want to share on it with us.
Yeah, I got wind of Estonia because it was
like hours ago. Yeah,
and I woke up this morning thinking it's 50-50 if there's going to be a political agreement or not today, and Estonia's holding firm on some of the real issues of that one pillar, the deemed supplier regime of VIDA, and a lot of the issues that are just not being discussed or being ignored. The basics about proper VAT principles like neutrality, channel neutrality, things like that. Also burdens. That what that targets, you got to look beyond the Airbnbs and the bookings and what have you. You got to look at the travel ecosystem is huge. I mean, tens of thousands of SMEs are involved, and are that type of regulation will kill them. And with the future of the EU being SMEs, that definitely does not help. So they did put forth a compromise, which is an opt-in. If a country wants to do it, they opt in. It still doesn't address some of those issues, but it's better than I think what came out originally in December of 2022.
Yeah, and after an opt-in, what would be your next best?
Well, the first best would be remove it from VIDA and then keep actually talking about it. And again, thinking, just everyone forget the politics for a second. Let's think about what actually makes sense here. But if opt-in, then I would say opt-out. So a country would have the opportunity to opt out from it.
Yeah, but if anything, optional or just fully abolished, basically.
Yeah, I mean, give member states or let them retain the autonomy to make the best tax policy decisions that they feel they need to make for their country. That's what it comes down to.
Makes sense.
But just to highlight that there was only one thing that disagreed, which was deemed reseller. What nobody disagreed with, as far as I recall, listening to the council, was the digital reporting and rules. Yeah, everything else that everybody so seems to be on board with, which is again, Rob.
Yeah, you're fully right. But anyway, sorry for that kind of like sidetrack. It was just so kind of like current. I felt that we had to say something on it. But back to the main topic, Eco. If I'm not mistaken, Robert, you kind of like send out ahead of time to the audience if there are any things that they want to talk about today specifically. Eco, what were like the main topics that people want to talk about today?
There's a lot of responses. Thank you, Robert, for doing that. Now, number one, it tells us the kind of topics that you want us to hear about. The bad news is a lot that came in. The good news is it can be bucketed into three things. The majority of it falls into three buckets. The number one is, of course, we want to know about the future of indirect tax and the compliance and reporting. That's one. There's a lot of interest in digital reporting. Yeah, we call it e-invoicing, some of us, but in reality, what we mean is the reporting of data to the tax authorities in real and near real time. And then there's also there's a good number of people who asked about the structure of tax teams, the skills needed for the future to be able to handle these challenges. So that's the three topics that you can manage to.
So basically all in line with the actual topic that we set out to discuss. Cool.
As long as we hit those, I think that you would
weave it in. Yeah, makes sense. Erich, then in that case, maybe we can touch upon like the future of indirect tax compliance first a little bit. You know Liz Gallagher at Meta, head of indirect tax there, of course, for EMEA quite well. We had a webinar with her, I want to say 2 weeks ago, Eco, or something like that.
Yeah.
Together with Steph at Adyen, like the payment processor, I want to say globally, probably by now for enterprise, their global indirect tax lead. The conclusion that we kind of arrived at was indirect tax is moving towards real-time data reporting, real-time compliance. Is that how you see things as well? Do you agree with that, first of all? And if so, how fast do you expect that will go?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that. I mean, let's face it, the days of static paper invoices, that's long gone. It's fraud and things like that. It's just technology is at a point where it just makes sense. And I totally agree that's the direction we're going. I think it's going to move fast, but let's not forget there's two sides of that real-time reporting equation. So it's, hey, business world, this is what you need to comply with, but governments also have product builds on their side to be able to actually deal with this. So I think it's going to move fast, probably globally, not as fast as everyone thinks. It'll still be quick, but again, you've got builds on both sides that need to happen. So that'll take time and investment.
Yeah, fair enough. But your take is that everyone is going to move into that direction from a government perspective.
Yep.
Is that also what you get back when you talk to like governments, IGOs, etc., OECD perhaps? Is that what they're driving for?
Oh yeah, and it's not just indirect tax. I mean, even ultimately, like the one of the goals of Working Party 10 at OECD was pre-filling out income tax returns for platform users and things like that. It's just no reason not to go down that route. So I definitely it
makes sense.
Yeah,
the future is digital from that perspective, and why not then make it real time as well?
Yeah.
It's fair. I was actually talking, or Eco and I were talking to someone at the OECD recently that said like the pace will probably by government will probably be determined by how tricky or complicated their data privacy landscape is.
Yeah,
because everything else aside, that's really what makes it hard, of course. Other than like the technological kind of like challenges there. What kind of major changes in the way indirect tax is managed by companies in general, so more broadly, do you foresee? And can you share perhaps with the audience how you're preparing for that, if you're doing anything in specific, that is?
Oh yeah, we're so first there's like internally a lot of cross-functional work, because this all again ultimately impacts the business, the user experience, supply, demand, pricing. So it has everyone's attention, and then it has everyone's attention because you tend to have, there's a lot of companies are like this. They'll have trust groups and they'll have tax groups, and they'll have policy groups. So you got people asking for data, the same data to their users like multiple times. So it's coordinating all of that type of stuff. But then it comes down to data. Data is everything, but it's quality of data.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything. And I assure you, there are many platforms out there that, again, there's a common assumption, I think, from governments that, like all companies have all pieces of data and it's absolutely perfect, but it's not.
Nothing is further from the truth. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, always perfect. And then verification of data. I mean, you have VIS in the EU. Yeah, that's not perfect, but you have that. But are you going to end up having to deal with 150 API verifications across the globe? Again, going back to scalability and things like that.
Yeah.
That's impossible to comply with, especially for SMEs.
Yeah, it's a fair point. And so are you focused a lot on like that very starting point of gathering data in a structured way, and also to basically ensure quality, but then also to make sure that all teams internally tap into that same data pool? Because to your point, I can imagine just as a consumer being asked the same information twice is already bad, let alone multiple times. That's just
Hey, you're like, you just asked me for that. Why are you asking me again? And it's a fair question,
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that we started looking at a long time ago, to centralize that, making sure there's everyone's using universal sources of truth. They're using the same thing. Yeah. It's efficient. It's a good user experience. You do it in a way to ensure the best quality that you can. Things like that. So.
And do you then, out of curiosity, and if I'm going too deep, by the way, let me know, but do you then have cross-functional group specifically for that, like that looks at data or data quality or user data, or how is it organized, and how do you make sure the text is at the table there as well? Because that's critical, of course, early on.
I think, well, we pretty much drive it and then pull everything else. So, and again, when you through a lot of effort on this journey of making sure the executives are aware of the importance of these issues, it's easier to get support to have these cross-functional groups to actually work on these issues.
That's a really important one.
And it's always cross-functional. I think one of the questions that came in through the chat was that, based on your intro, you mentioned that you have a pretty sizable team, but you also mentioned there's also tech inside that. In general, do the tech and the product guys, is there ones that report into the tax function, or are there others that have a different org that you need to convince rather than compel to do things?
No, they are solely dedicated to tax. The tech side team, it's solely dedicated to tax. So I don't need to go try to talk someone into, hey, we need this resource to build this, that, the other thing. It's I know the roadmap, and I'm the one deciding. It's like, all right, we have only X amount of hours this year, so we're going to prioritize this. So it's all within me and the team to be able to drive that.
And there are other, of course, IT or technology functions that focus on other parts like billing, et cetera, that they would work with. I imagine, right? Yeah. Okay.
So it's basically like the fintech team that has kind of allocated a specific subset of resources to tax as a team, like they would to Eco's point, to payment or treasury or what have you. And that's then something where you drive the actual roadmap in terms of how to deploy that. That's so interesting. Yeah, and I imagine so efficient as well.
Yeah.
Versus having one larger roadmap and trying to get tax on there, right? Which what you often see.
Oh yeah,
which is hard.
Yeah, that's how it was in the old days. And
yeah, exactly. Well, I mean that's unfortunately, Erich, that's still, I think, for most companies, but the far majority, that's how it works. You need to be lucky and stand in line to get some resources to do something for you.
I think when I first joined, I went to my boss. I said, I want 10 engineers and I want them to report to me. And she looked at me like I'm insane. She still looks at me like I'm insane, but that's for other reasons. But today it's like, see, that wasn't such a
bad idea. Yeah, it makes sense. What do you think, despite having those resources, what's a major challenge you see for you and your team de facto in the coming years or the next decade? What's going to be the major hurdle for you?
I mean, it's still, it's like I mentioned this before. Nothing's easy to do. Everything takes a lot longer to actually build it in the system and get it to work, and setting up your testing and your SOX controls and this, that, the other thing. And I think the challenge is because the shift of responsibilities to companies, to platforms for around taxes is only going to grow. And so one is externally convincing governments to give time. And because a lot of times they think, well, again, you're a tech, you're a tech company, just do a couple things on the keyboard, and you're off and running. So that's a challenge right there to get lead time from governments for these things. And even with a big team, there's only so many hours in a year, and when you're building a lot of different things that you have to build, especially ones that are very unique, it's a challenge. I think one of the things because we used to be very reactive, because back when I had less resources, like something will come up, it's like, all right, we got to just jump on this. But we're slowly getting to the point where we can look at, you can actually breathe a little bit and look at, all right, how are we building this? Let's build something that we can reuse, we can leverage. It's a baseline platform, so we can be a lot quicker with launching new types of regimes and things like that. But again, it's a journey to get there, because if you don't have the resources, it's tough. And I remember I spoke to, it's a very large online retailer that everyone in the world has heard of, but they are light years ahead with the engineering at the time. And I got some people to talk to them, and I asked them about their journey and learned a lot, and kind of used some of those things to, get me on that journey and get the company on that journey.
That's super interesting. I'm thinking out loud, like, just listening to you carefully. If I may summarize, what you're saying is like, look, this is a journey. This is not something that you can do from one day to the next. It's also about working with government to have them realize that, right?
Yep.
But having that said, you started on the journey quite a while back with the company, asking for resources, getting them eventually, and building and using external parties as well. I think the question, of course, is like, for those companies, especially the ones that we have online today, that are seeing the more imminent future, because we're already here, right? And now we're confronted with this notion of real-time or near real-time compliance, especially in like the e-invoicing and digital reporting space. They may not have been on that journey very long or at all, as in they may not have the resources, they may not have that foundational kind of like thinking or the strategy yet. So that's just not something that resonates that well, probably. How do you get there? So when you first kind of like started, was this like a strategy that you outlined for the team or for the function? Did you really focus on small wins? How did you go about to get from, let's say, 0 to where you are today and beyond?
Yeah. So I started just seeing where the world was going. You could just tell where things were going to go. And then it was just building that case. It was building because remember these things, if you end up not being able to comply, a lot of times this will spill over into, this will have a non-tax impact. And I'm not just talking about penalties and things like that. It'll have, depending on what sector you're in, it'll have policy impacts. It can have other knockoff impacts that you don't necessarily want to have, but also, and probably more importantly, it'll impact your users. And and I think what you need to do is you need to convince the people that are going to help you get on this journey and help with resourcing and things like that. You have to make them understand that, like, if we're not ready in for say, let's take Vita for a second.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you weren't ready, well, sellers are going to have to go elsewhere, because VAT registered sellers, because they need to, like, they need to have that accounted for correctly too. So I think it's really showing impact. What are the what's the impact from a penalty standpoint? What's the impact from a user standpoint, policy standpoint? What's it really mean? Educating the leadership on getting them to understand the direction the world's going. Like, no one can run from this stuff. This is
exactly.
Erich, do you have to put those down into dollar amounts at the end of the day? Is that how the business would communicate in a common language, that what is the cost of this? Is that how you would?
That's definitely part of it. That's definitely part of it. That'll, I have a couple rules in life. One is know your audience. So it depends who you're talking to. What's the thing that they're going to care about? What that will get them interested in what you're talking about. But certainly that a financial impact is most people, that'll get their attention.
I would add, Eiko, that I think actually most tax function leaders focus too much on that, because inevitably, because Erich, if I listen to you, you're saying three things, right? You're saying user experience, vital, especially in like the B2C space, but even B2B these days, because those users are far more requiring. And then you say compliance, needless to say, key for every business, right? You have to be compliant at the end of the day. And then you also talk about like the business value in terms of potential dollar value impact, which is like, okay, if we're not compliant, they have to go away. My sense is, Eiko, and you probably recognize this as well, a lot of companies just focus on that. If we're not compliant, then this is the potential fine risk. But that's hard to quantify oftentimes. Like, okay, what is that actual fine, and how hard and how hot is that going to be dealt with in reality, right? So I think adding those two layers that you mentioned is actually critical to really like say, okay, what is the business impact of this across the board versus solely focusing on the monetary impact that is potential, right? From a liability perspective due to non-compliance, I mean.
Which also becomes a little bit easier to dismiss the number. It's also so you're telling me if you give me a number, so I can pay to not do this. Hey, there you go. Yeah. But you need to kind of consider the other elements as well, as Erich was saying.
Business impact, continuity. But so we guess what you're saying is interesting. Know your audience, who you talk to. Do you, if I'm overstepping, let me know. But do you then go on like sort of like a roadshow past different stakeholders, or do you deal with them all at once? Do you write like a document for it, or is it more conversational that you kind of like bring them up to speed on these trends? Woude is a good example. How do you paint the picture to get that buy-in? Because that's what a lot of people ask us.
All of the above. Yeah, definitely all of the above. I do have regular syncs with the full leadership group to give updates on, what are the big topics that we're dealing with. But a lot of these things, like Woude is its own topic that is something that I address separately, especially with the details of it. So it depends. I often will talk to folks separately. Depends on how we feel about wanting to land that message, basically.
Yeah, exactly. How urgent and how critical it is. Yeah. Got it. It makes perfect sense. I think this too is a very important one for many folks listening, that the communication part towards external stakeholders or internal stakeholders, for that matter, is critical. Out of curiosity, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say that, especially for companies new on this journey, that internal education to leadership is really important. Educating them on this is what's going on in the world with specific examples, just to show that this isn't a passing fad or something that we can ignore. This is something that needs to be jumped on now and addressed now, and start planning for that, whether it's build, it's outsource, or some combination thereof. But it's you just can't just not comply. I mean, that's not the world we live in.
No, and I think for your type of business or the marketplace business in general, that moment came kind of like a long time ago already, right? Because of the severe consequences of and risk on the business. My sense is that e-invoicing is doing that for all businesses right now, right? That's kind of like that pressing, like this has actual real-time business consequences if we don't comply. It's just going to shut you down, basically.
Yep.
So we have to comply. In terms of 2 weeks ago when we had our webinar with Liz as well, someone in the audience said, like, look, this is all nice and well, Liz or Erich, what you're talking about, but I'm so busy, I can't even get my head out of like the regular compliance and periodic work. How do you find time to even seek out like more strategic or longer term improvements or efficiency gains, or think about like technology? How do you set aside time for this? Is this like, do you deliberately do that, or?
Well, I definitely appreciate being busy comment, because there are days I'm always somewhere around the globe. There's always so much going on. I think one of the keys is finding, first of all, finding a good network. We have great relationships with a lot of the platforms and other e-commerce type of companies where we're so much farther ahead. And sorry if there's an advisor on this call, I'm going to apologize for insulting you, but like we're in a day and age where we'll get alerts from different advisors about, Egypt and their new ESS regime.
Yeah.
I get that alert. It's like, oh, thank you, but I already spoke to Egypt 6 months
in the room.
Like, yeah, I already met with them about. I already knew about this a year ago. It's things like that. So
yeah,
but you're able to do that if you're able to network. It helps. That knowledge share helps you kind of think about this and get there a lot quicker. At least understanding the landscape of what's going on externally. Now, internally, yeah, there's no other way to say it. You just got to make the time, because you're going to pay for it if you don't.
Yeah. And I never fully realized this until you now break it down this way. But what you're actually saying is that by being proactive, which you have always been, and by being so on the forefront of things, by virtue of that, you automatically have that insight of where things are heading, and thus you automatically start focusing on longer term and more strategic things as well, right? So as in, you almost get out of the weed automatically by doing that, by talking to external folks.
Exactly. My goal, because this is what happens, and I get it. It's typical, but let's say there's a bill introduced or a directive or something like that. It's introduced. Well, I want to get to the people before the draft is introduced. That's the time to really have those conversations. It's a lot harder to make those necessary changes when that's produced. So that's why trying to be proactive. And again, if you're busy, develop that network and kind of ride the coattails of others that have the time to be a little more proactive. But the sooner you can get in front of these things and learn about them and discuss them and see what you can potentially tweak, it's way better off than just kind of waiting.
Does it also come from the fact that you see governments, tax authorities copy each other, so that like, okay, if I'm not gonna start here, this is gonna have an effect, like a domino effect elsewhere?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think what's the contagion risk? That's
exactly
probably a top 3 question I've been asked a billion times.
Yeah,
because that's just how it is. And it's funny because governments know what's going on. I mean, again, this is just an example for me, but I think I was meeting with might have been the ATO, and they knew about something we were doing, and it was either San Francisco or New Orleans. But I was like, how do you like wow, like how do it would take you some time to actually figure that out and ask questions, but they learn that and be like, well, can we do that? Or can we do part of that? So they definitely will copy. It's just easier than to starting from scratch.
Yeah. So if you influence one, you kind of indirectly influence a lot of others as well, right? With your education and information. Eiko and I are very different in terms of how we think about asking questions. I always ask like, okay, how do you do things well, or what are like best practices? Eiko, I recall that you mentioned before we jumped onto that you want to ask some things that you should not do, right? Like the negative.
Because I always think that there's a lot of advice. Here's what you should be doing in this space. You should be going out. Erich, what's the piece of advice that I want to say? What's the stuff that you said? I've been told this. I am never doing that, or I've tried that and I regret it. What's the things that you would say that you've heard that come to mind, if anything, other than being invited to a pub with me?
That's always the best advice I've ever had, going to a pub with you, without a doubt. But honestly, and I might come back to this question. Can't think of one glaring thing that I really regretted, because, and you have to keep in mind, in the platform space, over the last decade or so, it's been very raw and new. We're kind of just making it up as we go along.
Yeah.
So certainly some things haven't worked out, but it's always around just trying to make an impact, trying to partner with jurisdictions, trying to do the right thing.
Do you know what the one that came to my mind, if I may give you one, which I think you managed to avoid based on your previous stats? It's when my past life with Rob, we implemented a lot of hacks that we would do things that it was a discussion of, can we get away with something which is good enough for now? But then you realize there's nothing more permanent than a temporary solution. I'm going
to rescind my answer, and actually, like, you hit the nail on the head, because I mentioned earlier, you go from, your goal is to not be reactive. It's to be thoughtful, proactive, build capabilities, not one-offs, not MVPs, minimally viable product, like that type of stuff, because it's always, we'll fix it later. And
you don't.
You don't. Like most companies, you do what you have to do. You had X amount of resources. You do what you have to do. but that's a tough world to be in because the ripple effects, it'll haunt you. It'll haunt you for years, and then wait till the first round of controversy comes around, then it'll really haunt you. So yeah, I would definitely agree with that comment. I think pretty much most companies go through that until they're able to build up better capabilities and resources.
Which is a hard decision, by the way, because you don't know. You have to do things within the moment, and then it's only the benefit of hindsight that you say, actually, we should have invested probably some more into this.
Yes.
I'm thinking, Erich and Eiko, given that someone in the audience also asked about like people and what sits in your team versus outside, my take, and I hope that you guys agree, is that given that if we all agree, right, that we're entering an era of real-time reporting and compliance everywhere, basically at a very granular, like transactional data level, we all agree that data quality needs to be superb. Otherwise, things fall apart, right? That automatically then means that we need to invest a lot more in technology, simply put, because you can't do that at a human level with the scale and the pace and the real-time nature. We end up working with a lot more different stakeholders today, cross-functionally, than we used to do, like, I don't know, a decade or two back, right? In tech, far more isolated. What does that mean from a skill set perspective and from a kind of like types of roles that you hire for, Erich? Is there like, do you have a different view right now on what you hire in your team or hire for, like in terms of like the roles and the tasks than you did before?
Yeah.
How's it evolving?
I still have I'm oversimplifying it, but I kind of have like the legal side of the group and then the operation side of the group. And so that's like the overarching split. So the legal side is still, because we're the ones doing, we're looking at, negotiating with governments, analyzing legislation, handling controversy, all that type of stuff. So that kind of stays the same. Though you need people in that group, because I've hired several resources on that side, but you want them with like, I love platform experience. It doesn't have to be accommodations because that's going to be impossible, but it's a strong preference to have that because they understand the issues more. They understand the importance of the systems, and then they can work with and learn our operations side and system side, because that shapes how you actually look at new laws, new proposals, things like that. So that's a tweak on the legal side. And then on the operations side, it's still, I wouldn't say there's not specific like system because a lot of the stuff, over the years, there were no providers for what we needed, and that's kind of probably somewhat unique to us, not fully unique. So it was more, look at if you're an engineer in a finance, tax, technology group, perfect. We'll teach you the rest.
Got it. So basically, what you're saying is that the actual technology skills that are already there, more generally speaking, in the fintech domain, or in some people call it like the IT organization, right? More traditionally speaking, you would then tend to kind of upskill them on their tech knowledge versus doing it the other way around and saying, well, hey, you're by nature, you're like a tech professional. We're going to help you move more towards the tech side of things. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, it's again, the one side, I want people, they have to have the tax background, obviously. And then, but coming from a background that they understand platforms or like technology companies. And then, but the other side on like for the actual eng or operations persons, still, especially since all this is still evolving, that, the preference is to have them just coming from a good, like, financial technical organization. And then, we customize them based on our systems.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, what we see more and more, that's actually why I was asking. We see tax teams actually hiring folks that, for example, have very strong data science or data analytic kind of backgrounds. Not so much because they have to build systems or really kind of like go to that fintech side of things, but more because they need to work with large quantities and qualities kind of like of data. And that's becoming such a crucial skill, it seems, that they want to have that closer to their core competencies, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely, that's for sure. I mean, we have a large data team. It's we need it. And I think the focus on growing that as a specific function for tax has definitely been an emphasis. The skills are kind of the same for data, but it's just getting good data people and actually building that as a function because it's needed. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So Erich, I was also having a look at your job description, trying to figure out what technologies the company uses, purely for academic purposes, of course. I was looking at job descriptions of Airbnb, and sorry, hi Rob. So I was looking through them. What I noticed was they don't mention the tech, which sort of having been in this space, I know there's a time where you don't talk about the tech. It's when it's in-house built. So of course you'll name the ERP, familiarity with this, but it doesn't say anything else, which I'm kind of accustomed to using or hearing in descriptions on the market, which to me is kind of like that's a sign of an internal team that's building a lot of stuff, because they're not going to put like Airbnb module lists and that, because nobody would know that until you've joined the company. Is that accurate?
I mean, I'll just say this. Let's put it this way: a lot of things that we need, especially because we tended to be first in line across the globe, there was nothing available, to solve that. So you do what you got to do.
Yeah. I mean, we've experienced the same, right, on our end, Eiko. There was just nothing to do there, even if it sometimes didn't make sense from a scale or from a wanting to do it perspective. If there's nothing else out there, you have to, right? That's the only way. Okay, so what you said, by the way, Erich, is an interesting one. You basically have like a legal side of the operations, which is also more like the external facing side, I imagine, especially when it comes to government. That then translate that into more functional business requirements, and that's where your operations team basically steps in and says, okay, now we're going to give this hand and feet in our own corporate infrastructure and business reality, right?
Like all those negotiations, all that tax policy work, eventually it leads to we have to do something. So at that point, then it's to the operations folks. It's all right. This is what we need to do. Here's the technical requirements. Now go away and talk to the smart kids and make it happen.
The smart kids being the ones that are actually able to work with the tech, and okay, got it. Yeah. The next generation, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. In terms of their perspective, to the extent that you can summarize it for us, what do they see as like the massive task ahead? What's there like, wow, guys, this is coming. This is going to be massive for us. Ideally industry agnostic, but if I can imagine for you, it may be specific.
Yeah, I just think the topic of this whole chat, just real-time reporting. I mean, that's it just touches so many aspects, and again, so e-invoicing, real-time reporting, it's like saying AI. AI means about 200 different things. That's the thing. So even real-time reporting, what is it? What's that mean? I mean, there's going to be so many flavors of that. That's the issue. So
and the in-betweens, and then the reconciliation.
Yeah.
We had an interesting question, Eiko and I, to a previous webinar guest around like the future of traditional indirect tax compliance, i.e. like VAT, GST returns. How do you think about that? Is this going to be the end or the death, as some call it, of the VAT return through e-invoicing? So basically through real-time transactional reporting, is that going to abolish the need for that?
It should, and I think it will eventually. It's not going to happen
before we retire.
It's exactly. I hope. I think that's going to take some time. I mean, and I'm just talking globally here, because it's when, first of all, it takes time again to do the builds on the platform side and the government side, and then is this even working? It's in all the years of tweaks and adjustments to make sure it's actually working. So yeah, someday, but I don't think it's going to be in the next 5 years. I mean, maybe somewhere, but generally speaking, no, it'll take a lot longer than that.
Do you have a specific horizon that you work with your teams on? You say like, hey guys, we're looking for 5 years ahead. Everything out there that's less tangible, but it's coming. We don't really tend to focus on it because it's still in flux, or how do you think about it?
No, it's kind of near term, medium term, and long term, and it's just saying this is like because I want when we build things now, I want people thinking about, all right, if we build it. So Erich talked about this is where he thinks the world is going in the next 5 years, 7 years, something like that. So what kind of flexibility can we build in? So I do like to talk about that a lot. Again, I'm not a fortune teller. I'm not always right, but
no.
There are certain things you can tell where they're going. And because I want the builds of today to think about that type of stuff. I don't want to wait and tell them about that later and have someone say, geez, I wish we would have built such and such a certain way. It would have made this so much easier at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Erich, as you know, Rob was mentioning that a lot of we had this debate in the past, but what everybody agreed on is that it's going to happen at some point. But this maybe the death of the VAT return or the GST return is a little bit too far ahead. But maybe an easier one is, how soon will real-time transaction reporting, do you think, become the norm based on how you're looking at it? Is it 3, 5, 7, 10 years?
I think it's honestly, I think it's probably 10 years, and there's still going to be in 10 years, if you've got 60% of the globe doing it, I might even be a little surprised. Again, these things move, they move slow, but it'll come. I wonder what the last country to fall will be. We should start a poll. Maybe you should do a poll on that.
Yeah. What I'm going to check is if how folks in the audience are also thinking whether that is Robert. I'm going to try. You guys continue, but I'm going to try and publish a poll.
Well, I think there was one interesting question in the chat that I think I have the answer to, but I'm going to ask you anyway, which is, how different is the US landscape from a technology perspective and a requirements perspective versus rest of the world international, basically non-US?
I mean, I think it's in a lot of ways way easier. People, especially, I'm going to carve me out of this because we deal with tourist taxes, which is local in nature. So that presents its own unique challenges and volume. And I'm not saying U.S. sales tax is easy, because it's not. It's harder than most people realize. But I think VAT is far more complicated. It's a totally different landscape. Also depends on what industry you're in too for the US.
Fair enough. Yeah, and of course you in your specific kind of industry have a lot of other obligations, like you mentioned, as well, on the data sharing side, etc. That make it hard both internationally and domestically, I imagine, right?
Yep.
Makes sense. Eiko, what are you putting on my screen? Because I'm seeing something pop up. How soon will real-time transaction reporting be the global norm?
Same question to Erich. You're looking 3, 5, 7, 10 years. How bullish
or how bearish
are you? I can see it on my screen as the majority of people are coming in, and we have kind of a 50-50 split between 7 years and 10 years almost.
Got it. Okay.
I voted.
Actually, no. Sorry, hold on. Let me rephrase that. It's faster than 7 years. It's more than 50% at the moment, but some 42%. I think it's a little bit further out. So Erich, there's a sizable chunk that agree with you, but there's a majority so far that believe it's going to be a little bit faster than 10. So we'll see.
Well, I think that's actually a nice one, because just kind of like thinking about what you all said, right? It's a long journey. You have to start somewhere. It's about making sure that the business understands the need early on. It's about, in a way, fortune telling, right? Well, what you've been doing by talking, well, not really fortune telling, but informed fortune telling, by talking to various external stakeholders, being on top of what's going on, where you can influence, I hear, right? And then making sure that you kind of like have enough support internally to get going. If the audience, and I agree, by the way, is of the opinion that it's going to probably be like 5 to 7 years before you see massive, like real massive adoption, although we already see a lot of things going on, of course, across the world. Is it fair to say then that they have to start today, Erich, with that journey and exercise? And where would you recommend they start? What is like a good starting point if you're just hired in a function, interesting role somewhere in tax, and you need to drive change on this? What do you do?
I go back to, you got to so if you have no resources, you got to get the resources. You got to educate.
That's number one. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. You got to educate the people that'll give you the stakeholders. and hammer home why this is important and that impact, that overall impact. And who cares about penalty? I mean, I do care about penalties, but
yeah,
the overall impact, things like that. That's the first thing I do. I'd be like, if I was hired somewhere else and there was no resources, why I go to leadership and say, are you crazy? Are you insane? Here's what's going to happen. And here's how this is going to impact our business. We need to get on this now, full stop. And by the way, if we're public or if we want to become public,
yes.
well, you need to clean this. You have to clean this up either way.
Yeah, makes sense. And is it then fair to say that one of your key stakeholders is always going to be that fintech department, whatever name they go by in your local company?
Yeah, for sure. I think I think the other thing is, again, build that network, and especially people with the good technical knowledge of how this works from other companies. That will definitely help you shape your messages. Talk to other companies that are farther down this. Say, how did you get it? Just learn from that and use that to build your own case.
What do you get back? Yeah, I think, by the way, we're about to be at time, if I'm not mistaken, Robert, right? Eiko?
And we do have a lot of interesting questions. What I'd like to say is that in a practice that we usually do, Rob and I, Robert, is it possible to export some of these questions that weren't answered, and we'll try and help with maybe answering them, run some of them past Erich before we reply. And we try and answer to the folks usually in our webinar, so we'll do our best. But there's quite a few.
Them all, but yeah, exactly.
See, time flies when you're having fun, and
that's what they say.
Talk is super fun.
We're gonna find out a way, Erich, to do this live at some point.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
And just do it like face to face. See how that works.
That'd be great.
If it adds something. Cool. Thank you so much for now, Robert. Maybe you have some last words.
My last words are the results from the original poll we had at the start about how prepared are you for real-time compliance.
I'm curious.
We had over half the audience vote on that, and 0% said fully prepared and already in place, interestingly. 32% said somewhat prepared. We've explored e-invoicing, but haven't fully implemented it yet. 55.8% said just looking into it early in the exploration phase, while 3% have not considered, and 8.8% are not sure of their business's readiness for real-time compliance.
Got it. That's interesting.
I would say that I'm not surprised no one answered 100% ready to go, because we don't even know what we need to be ready to go for yet on a global basis.
Yes, that's a fair point. And
just
by the way,
that's it.
On that note, maybe just to add very, very quickly, for those of you that do want to learn more about that, Eiko and our text team tend to publish a lot on this in terms of anything from procurement guides to how to get ready for these things. That could be useful there as well. Because to your point, Erich, I think it is just about learning as much as you can, as fast as you can, to make sure that whatever you do is an informed decision, basically, right? Yep. Awesome. Cool.
And as the organizer, I want to say the audience, thank you for being here. I recommend that you follow both Eiko and Rob on LinkedIn, not just because they share some very interesting tax memes on a regular basis, but you'll be able to continue the conversation. Apologies to those questions we didn't get to, but we will forward all questions to the team and they will respond to them. Thank you very much. The most thanks to Erich for being our special guest for this very fast-paced and insightful discussion. I think we got twice as much discussion as maybe some other panels that we may have had. So it was full of insight. So thank you for a great discussion. Again, the audience, it's great to have you here. I will keep you posted. We'll also be able to share, if you'd like to see some past videos as well. So later in the year, we'll have a few more discussions like this. Our annual corporate tax event is in November in Amsterdam. So I'll keep you posted on that as well. I appreciate all the emojis flying through the space, the cyberspace. So thank you for that. Look forward to see you in the future. And it is now 6 o'clock Central European time. So have a great morning or evening, depending on where you are. And we'll see you in the near future.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, Erich.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.